Welcome, everyone. This is Nancy Desjardins from healthlady.com, and I'm calling in from Georgetown, Ontario in Canada. So Happy New Year to all of you. We're back on schedule this week for my teleclasses, and this is a great opportunity to check out the interviews on my blog, as well as a great way to start the new year. So if you haven't been on my blog this week, go to healthlady.com. Under blog, you'll see the information about the body's connection to winter. It's a report that I put together. I also included 20 nourishing winter recipes and soups, very healthy soups, stews, vegetable dishes with lots of spice that you can use for this time of the year. I also include some winter salads and some dessert as well. So if you didn't, this was announced on my newsletter, but it's also on my blog. So go on healthlady.com under blog, and it's the first blog post, and it's called "The Body's Connection to Winter." So today on the call we have Dr. Liz Lipski. And we'll talk about leaky gut, why it's important to know about leaky gut, how can you know if you have it, what can you do about it. We're going to talk about autism, what is the role of diet in autism, and why are we seeing such a rise in autism, ADD, ADHD, and childhood illnesses. We're going to talk about those things on this call today. So about Dr. Liz Lipski, Liz is a board-certified in clinical nutrition, a holistic nutrition. She's nationally known for her pioneering work and expertise in the field of nutrition, food allergy, and sensitivity and digestive health. Dr. Lipski is the author of Digestive Wellness, now in its 4th edition, Digestive Wellness for Children, and Leaky Gut Syndrome, and her latest book, The Digestion Connection. She's also on faculty of the Autism Research Institute. She's the founder of Access to Health Expert, and those are interviews. I mean, I think she has over 50 or maybe more interviews specialists from around the world available for free to listen. So visit her website, which you'll be able to listen to those interviews. And Liz's website is innovativehealing.com, so innovativehealing.com. Liz, welcome back.
Thanks. Thanks for the nice introduction. I also wanted to just say that I'm the academic director of the nutrition programs at Maryland University of Integrative Health. And that's really the main work that I'm doing these days, is running our on-campus and online master's degree programs. So that's kind of what I'm doing these days, almost exclusively. So and all those other things are great. As you said, at Access to Health Experts, people can, it's a free website with lots of interviews and great information there. So people can go there and just pick up stuff for free, which I think information doesn't do good buried under a rock somewhere. It should be out there.
Well, I did the same thing before Christmas. All my interviews are available right now to to everyone. And you're right. You have we want to have this information available to everyone as much as possible.
So great that you did that.
So, Liz, let's start with leaky gut. So can you explain the term of leaky gut?
I can. Let me just start backwards a little bit with the digestive system. It's something that we don't think about very often, because when it's working right, we just don't even think about it. But if you're constipated, or you have heartburn, or you have diarrhea, or you're having cramping, then all of a sudden it seems like the center of your universe, because it makes you really uncomfortable when it's not working right. And the intestines are in two main parts, the small intestine and the large intestine. And the large intestine, or colon, is really where all of our nutrients, most of them have been absorbed, and it's kind of our recycling center. It's where we get the last bit of nutrients from our food, and we take all the water and we recycle it back into our body, and so that we can have a bowel movement and get rid of the wastes. But if we didn't have that kind of recycling unit for all the water, we'd need to drink, gallons of water every day. The small intestine is much longer than the colon, and it's about 22 feet long, and it's where we actually absorb, where we digest all of our food, and we absorb most of our nutrients. And the lining of the small intestine is only one cell thick, and that lining has like a mucus layer. If you think about kind of how your nose is, there's usually some little kind of protective mucus layer in there. And then there's, your skin, and the skin of the nose, if you've ever had a nosebleed, is pretty delicate. And the reason is because we're breathing in, and so we want to be able to take in that breath and take in the smells because, immediately. And so the intestine's the same way, and so it's not very thick. And the small intestine has a dual role. The role is to let all these digested nutrients go into our bloodstream so that we can use them in our cells, or to keep out bacteria and viruses and toxins and big food molecules that don't belong in our bloodstream. And so it has a big job to do. And what happens is that in leaky gut, some of this job gets compromised. I wish I could show you a picture, but it's almost as if the molecules that are too big, the viruses, bacteria, toxins, chemicals, and big food molecules, they just slip right into the bloodstream. And sometimes even candida molecules, little yeasts, slip into the bloodstream. And once they get into the bloodstream, the cells can't utilize these very well, or heavy metals or chemicals get picked up by the cells and make the cells less efficient and less effective. Or these food molecules get into the bloodstream, and the cells are kind of screaming and saying, well, I need energy and I need nutrients, but the nutrients that are in the bloodstream are too big for the cells. So then the immune system starts saying, well, what's this garbage here? Let's get rid of it. And so this is really the basis for a lot of the food sensitivities that we're seeing that people have for things like eczema and psoriasis, and plays a role in most autoimmune conditions. We don't have data on all of them, but most of them. So things like type 1 diabetes and lupus and rheumatoid arthritis and multiple sclerosis and celiac disease and so many things, that leaky gut is one of those components that has to be there in order for the autoimmune disease to be triggered. And so we're starting to see that when digestion doesn't work right, that we can have these full body issues that seem to have nothing to do with digestion, but do, because the purpose of digestion is for us to eat delicious food, and then for that food to get digested fully, go into the bloodstream, to get to the cells, to give the cells what they need, and then for us to excrete the waste. And if the cells can't get what they need, then we don't feel at our best. And leaky gut, so it impairs everything. And I've even worked with people with asthma where we start working on their gut and they feel better. So that's just kind of a quick summary of what leaky gut is.
Well, didn't you say a few times, this is our third interview together, Liz, but every interview we had together, you mentioned that 2/3 to 75% of the immune system is located in the digestive system.
Yes, and it's logical that it is. The reason why it's there is because every day, and I've said this before, every day we're taking stuff that we call food, and we're putting it in our body. So we're taking these foreign molecules, we're putting them in our body. And so maybe you ate a pound of food already today. And so your body has to decide what to do with all that pound of material. And so that's why most of the immune system's in the digestive system. And what we're also finding out is that most of it is really in the small and large intestine. And a lot of it has to do with the microbes that live inside us in harmony, and we call those the gut microbiome. And this microbiome helps regulate our metabolism. It is a huge part of our immune system. It helps us break down lactose and manufactures B vitamins and vitamin K, and it helps determine whether we're fat or thin or how well our immune system is going to work. So the digestive system, to me, is such an interesting system because, if it doesn't work right, nothing else does. But you could say the same of the lungs. If your lungs weren't working right and you couldn't breathe, then you would have lower quality of life and wouldn't feel as well either.
So going back with the digestive system, so the digestive system basically runs on relaxation, and yet, so many of us are eating on the run or, we're stressed out, so obviously this interferes with the digestive system.
Yes, the digestive system is mostly run on what we call the parasympathetic nervous system, which is kind of like the, I'm relaxed and everything's good. And so that's one of the reasons why grace or saying grace or taking a few breaths before you eat is so important, because it helps to get your body, your digestive system prepared and say, you know what, I'm not running around like a crazy person right this minute. I'm actually sitting down and I'm nourishing myself on a lot of different levels. I'm taking a break. I'm enjoying the flavor of what I'm eating. Might be with friends or family, or I might just be having a quiet moment by myself in the midst of my busy life. And so when we actually kind of stop, digestion works better. There is one part of the digestive system that actually takes a huge amount of energy. The whole thing takes a huge amount of energy. But in the stomach, we're concentrating hydrogen atoms to make a really acidic environment so that we can it can act as a deterrent to parasites and viruses and bacteria and, eating meat that's slightly old and, so it helps prevent us from getting ill and also helps to start the process of digesting our proteins. So, but in general, you want your digestive system to feel relaxed. Yes,
that's right. And that's why, it's amazing when we go on holiday, we feel so relaxed. We can get away with few things that normally we wouldn't be able to get away in our normal routine. And so just because we're relaxed.
Yeah, I even see people who I worked with who they'll go on vacation and they'll say, oh, I can't eat any gluten, or if I had a glass of wine, it would make me really sick. And they go on vacation and they come back and they're eating gluten and they're eating sugar and they're eating wine and they're eating foods that they've never been able to tolerate, and they're fine.
Yes. They're absolutely fine. It's amazing. Let's talk about grains. And do you feel the use of grains in our diet can be a fuel for bacteria in the intestine?
Interesting question. Yes and no. There's a lot to be said for a Paleolithic diet, which is looking at kind of how more primitive peoples lived before we had agriculture. It's only the last maybe 20,000 years or so that we've had agriculture where people have stayed in one place and planted vegetables and fruits and grains and nut trees and and so there are many people who believe that grains play no part in a healthy diet. I'm not one of those people. There are people for whom I think grains are terrible. But for the majority of us, we do pretty well with grains. I think the bigger issue is that, for me, is that when someone has a disordered microbiome, so by saying that they've got either a yeast infection, which we call candidiasis, or they have parasites, or they have a bacterial infection, then what happens is that carbohydrates in general, not just grains, but sugars, wine, beer, grains, starchy vegetables, even like potatoes, become fuel for those bad bugs. Okay. It's what they eat. And when the bad bugs are getting fed, then we feel bad. And so even like, I haven't mentioned it yet, but in autism we see this. We see this in people who have irritable bowel syndrome, which here in the States, about 12% of the population has IBS, which is, and it's higher in women. It's about 17% in women. And what it's characterized by is like feel better after you have a bowel movement, constipation, diarrhea, alternating constipation, and then followed by diarrhea, followed by constipation, feeling like you have gas and bloating and that your belly doesn't feel right. So when people have those kind of symptoms, often there's a bacterial infection or a parasite infection or a fungal infection that belies that. And when we eat food that feeds those bugs, then the cycle just continues and we don't feel well. So we have a lot of diets right now that are really focusing on controlling the kinds of carbohydrates we eat, and some of those diets are grain-free. So like a paleo diet would be grain-free, or the specific carbohydrate diet, first proponent by Elaine Gottschall, is grain-free, or the gut and psychology syndrome diet that Natasha Campbell McBride put together, also called the GAPS diet, is also grain-free. So, and then we have a ketogenic diet, which takes it even further, or an Atkins-type diet, which is also grain-free, and or really limited grains. And, all of these are such important diets because what they do is they modulate the health of the microbes that live within us, and they stop feeding the bad ones so that we can start having a more normal balance and we can feel better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So those diet would be, the most gut healing diet out there.
Yeah. There's one also that I didn't mention. It's a new kid on the block, and it's called the FODMAP diet. And that diet also is very specific about what kinds of fruits you can have, what kinds of carbohydrates you can have, with the theory that some people are sensitive to fructose and other people to lactose and other people to something called galactans. And so by looking at all of that, you're really controlling kind of what the conversation is in your belly by controlling what you eat. And it's amazing. I've seen people with all the things I've mentioned before, but also depression and attention deficit disorder and hyperactivity and, so many things calm down when we can heal that leaky gut and also use the right diet to not feed the bad bugs and get a better balance.
Interesting that you mentioned depression. Just before our call, like half an hour ago, I had a call with a client and changed her diet just before Christmas, and she continued her diet during the holidays. And the first thing she noticed, she said, I don't have that cloudy, like I feel so light, but depression is I no longer feel depressed. She said, I feel happy. And just by changing her diet, and also to eliminate, I know we're going to talk about this food that creates a lot of inflammation in your body. So we just, eliminate those food. And but this, it doesn't have to be long term, Liz. Like this could be just temporary until you eliminate those bacteria in your body, right?
Yeah, I probably like you. I'm not really seeing clients anymore, but when I was seeing clients or in just casual conversations with people, so many people are walking on what I consider to be the tightrope of a diet. They have found what works for them, and they don't kind of stray from that, because if they eat the wrong thing, then they don't feel well. And then we've got the other clients who've never even considered that food might be making them not feel well. Mm. And with both, what you want to try to do, like you want to, for people who are already on a very, very limited diet, what I want to do is broaden what they can eat by getting them healthier so that they feel better, so that their underlying issues are healed, so then they can start eating more normally again. And with somebody who I put on a specialized diet, it's the same thing. I really want them to be on a specialized diet while we're at the same time trying to fix those problems that caused the issue in the first place. And so the problems could be caused by a leaky gut, or they could be caused by that dysbiosis, these infections that I was talking about, in which case that you might get treated with regular medications or with herbs and with diet, because you want to do both in those cases usually. They could have inflammation. So, again, they might take anti-inflammatory drugs, or they might use things like curcumin or turmeric, or drink a lot of ginger tea, or use some demulcent herbs, things like slippery elm or aloe or mallow. There's so many or licorice, things that can be really soothing. We might also, some people might have enzyme deficiencies, and so we want to support them with enzymes. And you want to do all of this kind of work. You also want to look at their stress levels. As we said before, how much is stress contributing to how you feel? And what can we do to modulate that? And once we've addressed all those issues, sometimes in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year and a half, people notice, wow, I can eat pretty much normally.
And that's not a long time compared to how long you've been feeling the same way. So if you give yourself 6 months to a year, that's great. That's good recovery.
Yeah, I worked with someone who was in her late 20s, and she had been diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome at the age of 12. And it started right after she'd had a flu-like episode, and she was babysitting, and the baby that she was babysitting for at the age of 12 died from sudden infant death while she was there. Mm. And from that day on, she had irritable bowel syndrome. And she, so do you think that her emotions somehow were tied up with that? Yeah. But also she had just had the flu, and a lot of irritable bowel syndrome is post-infectious. It starts right after you've had a little infection of some sort. And so it just kind of simmers along, and most people just kind of learn to live with it. But I would advise you not to learn to live with it, to see if maybe you have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or maybe you have candidiasis or a parasite that might be actually causing it that could be treated. So when I saw this young woman, I said, why don't you go to your doctor and get tested for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth? Because I think from all your symptoms that's what's going on with you. And she said, okay. So she went and she did the test, and it didn't come out positive. But her doctor agreed with my possible assessment of it. And he said, let's just treat you anyway. So he treated her, and I put her on the specific I put her on the GAPS diet, the Gut and Psychology Syndrome diet. And within 2 weeks, she said, oh, my gosh, I haven't felt this good maybe ever in my whole life.
Wow.
You know, and so her energy was better. Her mind was clearer. Her irritable bowel syndrome was gone. I've seen people's arthritis disappear in a couple weeks, you know. It's so fantastic, the power of the right diet for you at the right moment.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite diet, though, Liz? Do you have, like, a diet that you say, well, hey, this is it, you know, just follow that? And
I do, and it works. I do. The diet that I love the best is just an elimination diet. I think we've talked about it before.
Yes.
And it's available at Access to Health Experts. All I ask you for is your email, but you can download it from there. And it's a really great diet because it's something that pretty much anybody can do and still eat out or have a real meal. So it's the least limiting. But I find that for inflammation, if we had a prescription medication that worked as well to reduce pain and inflammation as the elimination diet, it would be the number one selling drug of all times.
So when people go onto your website, so innovativehealing.com, so where is it right on the front page?
No, it's actually at Access to Health Experts.
Okay, so innovativehealing.com. Okay.
Yeah, and I haven't been on that website for a long time, but it's in the kind of, you know, goodies that you can get. But let me tell you about the diet because you don't even need to go there to get it. So what it looks like, what you can eat, is pretty simple. You can eat poultry, preferably organic. Mm-hmm. You can eat fish, preferably wild caught or caught from a water source you know that's clean. Yeah. So you can have you could have lamb or bison for your, you know, so you have meats and animal flesh that you can have. You can have pretty much any fruit, any vegetable, and you can have non-gluten containing grains. So you could have rice, white or brown. You could have quinoa, buckwheat, millet, and wild rice. You know, so you can have all those different kinds of grains. And then you can also use olive oil, coconut oil, and have some coconut, some sunflower seeds. And that's pretty much what and herbs and spices and herbal teas and water to drink. And that's pretty much what the diet looks like. So you could go to a restaurant and order, you know, a piece of broiled chicken or some broiled fish, and you can ask them to, only use olive oil on it, for example, and some herbs and spices. And then you could have a baked potato, and you could have vegetables and a salad, and you could have a pretty much normal meal. And it's a great diet. It works so well, and usually within the first 2 weeks, people are starting to feel different.
That's the beauty of it, Liz. Like, you don't have to wait too long to see some improvement. Yeah, for severe cases, it might take a few months, but yeah, this is great. But you mentioned restaurant too. I mean, this is just to be careful too, because most restaurants, they use canola oil for cooking, corn oil, or maybe soy oil. I mean, those are the oils that we just, have to be concerned of.
I agree. We do. They're canola and soy, unless it's organic oil, it's made with genetically modified crops, and we just don't have enough data to warrant this massive experiment that we're doing on all of us. And so, you want to be careful. On the other hand, let's say that you eat 2 meals out a week. How much damage is that going to do if you're really eating excellent quality food the rest of the time from home?
Yes.
But when we're eating, 75% of our meals at restaurants or half of our meals at restaurants, then we want to really look at the quality of the restaurants that we go to, and we want to think about maybe brown bagging it or taking a cooking class. Cooking is nurturing. Sometimes when I would work with clients, they would look at me like, I'd say, I want you to cook, and they'd look at me like, what? No, they had this terror in their eyes, and I would say, really, cooking can be so much fun. Like at the end of my busy days, I really love to get in the kitchen and make a simple but satisfying meal.
I'm so glad that you mentioned this. Cooking, I feel the same way, Liz. Cooking is it de-stresses you. It's nurturing. I do spend a lot of time in the kitchen, and it's not a chore. It's just I just love to be in the kitchen. And a lot of people too is also too, when people start to get the results, people start to feeling well, they spend the time in the kitchen. Now they realize, like, my God, it's true though. You feel much better, and you're preparing the food yourself. So, good. I'm glad you mentioned it.
For me, it's also a creative process.
Yes.
Because it's like, what am I going to concoct next, And mostly I'm just doing very basic things. Like this morning I woke up and I took some beets and I put them in a pot. I cut them up and I put them in a pot and I boiled them while I was doing everything else before I left the house. And when I left the house, I turned them off. And so tonight I'll go home and there will be cooked beets, and I can turn them into a cold beet salad, or I can warm them up again and put some butter or coconut oil on them, and and I'll have some beets, and I'll cook some protein, and I'll probably make some quinoa or maybe some polenta or something that cooks fast. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. Make a big salad to go with it. It doesn't have to take a long time.
But it is a big deal if you're not used to spend a lot of time in the kitchen. Well, you don't need to spend a lot of time in the kitchen, but if you're not used to spend some time in the kitchen, it is a big deal. It's like anything else in life when you haven't mastered, you haven't done this for a long time, but and then when you're comfortable, then it's like it's second nature. You just today this is what I'm going to do. But this is good. So Liz, here's this is I'm sure this question, so you get this question asked a lot of time about autism. Why are we seeing such a rise in autism? You look at ADD, ADHD, and childhood illnesses. Let's talk about that.
I think it's a multifactorial. I don't think that we can pin the tail on this donkey like one thing, In Canada, you do play pin the tail on the donkey as kids do. So I look at it from all these different factors. First of all, the new research in the field of the epigenome is pretty fascinating. And what it looks at is, we were all taught that our genes were set in stone, like how tall we were going to be and whether we were going to have brown hair or blonde hair or red hair, or whether we were going to have blue or green eyes, or the color of our skin, that all of that was going to be pretty much predetermined. And a lot of that is predetermined, yet what we know is that in every single cell in our body, there's every gene. Mm-hmm. Yet a lung cell is different from a skin cell, is different from your hair. All those cells are different. And so what we know is that certain genes get turned on and off in each cell so that they call express themselves, or they're silent. And what we're learning is that having happy and relaxed thoughts turns on certain genes and turns off other ones. What we're finding is that eating lots of fruits and vegetables and foods that have nuts and seeds and legumes turn on a lot of genes that are very protective and turn off a lot of genes that make us sick. in general. There could be somebody who has a nut allergy, and for them, nuts are not so good, because they're triggering something different. But for the great part, and what we're learning is exercise also turns on and off certain genes. And so there's this, what we call the epigenome. It's kind of above and around the genes and tells them to turn on and off. And so the research on this indicates that things that our grandparents and maybe even great-grandparents did turn on. They put on paper clips and take off paper clips of this epigenome. And so we have different markers that are put on there by our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our parents, so that when we're born, we already have some of these predispositions. So, for example, let's say that your family's lived in Canada where it's cold for, the last 100 or 200 years. And then you suddenly decide you're going to move down to Panama. There's some genes that are going to need to kind of regroup there and say, wait, we've kind of gotten used to this colder weather and the snow and the darkness of winter, and now here we come, and it's really hot. And the days are the same length year-round, and, I'm in a different environment. And so we're born with some of these genetic clips, and the fascinating thing is what they've discovered is that they usually get passed from grandfather to grandson or grandmother to granddaughter. But so we have some of this going on. And when I look at kind of the standard Western diet, it really started creeping in the 1950s and 1960s, where we stopped making everything at home from scratch, and we started using more convenience foods. Yeah. And then what came in was microwave.
Yes.
And then what came in is the GMOs.
Yes.
And all of these have a different effect on this epigenome. And also, unlike people who come from backgrounds like the Middle East or India, where the use of herbs and spices is so rich, the Western diet is very bland in comparison. And so there's herbs and spices that can help modulate things we don't use. Then we get to pregnancy, and I think that by the time a couple gets pregnant, that they have kind of these epigenetic clips that they've gotten from their parents and grandparents and beyond. They've picked up their own toxins during their own life, and then these get passed right into the embryo and the fetus. So one of my big bandwagons that I've been on lately is the idea of preconception planning whenever possible. There's been some work done on this. We certainly need a lot more research, but there's a physician named David Berger who's been working with autistic families for quite a long time, and he's got 500 autistic families that he works with. And in these families where people said, well, we don't want our next child to be autistic, but we still want to have another baby, he's worked with them to do preconception planning and look at their toxicity and get them on really good diets and make sure that they're really well nourished and that men's sperm counts are optimized with diet and nutrition and stopping use of drinking alcohol and using recreational drugs and things like that, and working with the women also to really regulate their hormones and again clean them up so that they're not drinking and that everything's optimized. In the 500 families that he's done this with, not one has had a subsequent autistic child or a child with ADD or ADHD. And we're starting, it's like we put so much emphasis on so many things, but kind of planning for pregnancy, other than planning when we want to get pregnant, is often something that we just don't really think about, like kind of how do we do some spring cleaning and optimize our health before we actually make a new life. And so I think that we see that toxicity plays a big role in autism. So we've got this epigenetic markers, we've got toxicity, we have the epigenetic markers of stress, we have also bombardment from electromagnetic frequencies.
That's a big thing. That's a big one, eh?
And that's very disruptive. And again, we don't have all the research that we might need to have on it. And then we have, then subsequently we have people with leaky gut, and then they're eating food that's scrambling their brains. So Candace Pert, who passed away not that long ago, what a big loss.
Yeah.
She wrote a book called Molecules of Emotion, and she discovered the neuropeptides in the brain, which is why opium and heroin work, and why all the opiates work. And what she discovered about that, and what we know, is that there are certain people, that there are foods that actually act like opiates. So in some people, dairy products and milk acts like an opiate called a casomorphin. And for some people, gluten acts as a gluteomorphin. And like if you and I were sitting around talking and we were both smoking opium right now, I don't know that we'd be having this kind of coherent or semi-coherent conversation.
I don't think so, yeah, exactly.
Because at least in all those movies I've seen of people smoking opium, they look pretty disconnected from the world. And so we know that some of our kids with autism, they have that opiate-like response. And with most of our kids with autism and ADHD, it's almost like their sensory gates are wide open.
Yeah.
And so they can't filter very well. And when we can't filter, what we do is we shut down.
Yes.
When all of us get overwhelmed, what do? We just want to stop and hide and go take a nap or something.
Yes.
Or sit and watch daytime TV, It's like, so I think, it's not just one thing, but, and then I think the huge rise in vaccinations and the not only the viruses, but also the little trace amounts of mercury and formaldehyde and other things that are in those viruses. In somebody who's already coming in a little bit on the edge, it's just one more thing that contributes. So, and I'm saying this about autism and ADD and ADHD. Here in the United States, 1 in 88 children at the age of 5 is diagnosed with autism, and more than 2% of our boys. And here in the United States, with ADD and ADHD in our children, it's about 12 to 14%.
Wow.
And so you look at that and you go, wait a minute, we've got like 1% of our kids with autism, 12 to 14% of our kids with ADD and ADHD, so that's 15, 16, and then we've got another 10% of our kids who are depressed, and how many of our children have asthma or other kinds of conditions. And so it's like, and we're talking about it with our children, but then we can look at it on the opposite end in our elderly who are losing their memories. Or we can look at it in terms of the rise of cancers, which when I started as a nutritionist and health educator in the late 70s, one person in 8 got some kind of cancer. Here in the United States, it's 1 in every 2 men and 1 in every 3 women.
And young, too, at a very young age as well.
Yeah. So we look at the rise of diabetes, obesity, autism, Alzheimer's, ADD, all these things. These are contemporary diseases. And I really feel that and evidence demonstrates that that kind of all these kind of stressful factors in our lives that are so different from how people lived 150 or 200 years ago. Mm-hmm. I mean, all this has happened so fast, and I think our bodies are doing the best job they can to cope, but really, eventually it's the straw that breaks the camel's back, and I think we're just seeing more and more of it. So those of us who are on the call, or those of us who are actually saying, I'm making changes and I'm trying to do better and minimize some of these external factors, hopefully our health is better, collectively than people who don't. And I think we see that as, I just think we see that. And we're, several generations into this experiment right now.
Mm. But like you mentioned, the preconception planning, if everybody was aware or concerned at the beginning with the preconception planning, I don't think we would have those illnesses to begin with. But this is what it is.
Well, we could have less, and I think public awareness is so confused about health, but people are trying to do the right thing, and I think once ideas catch on, people are smart and they'll pick them up. It's not to make people feel bad if you get unexpectedly pregnant, because there are a lot of healthy children who are born. Mm-hmm. Most of our children are healthy, but there's things that we can do to optimize not only their life, our children's lifelong health.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. So, Liz, we have a question from Jeanette, and she's from Vancouver. Okay. So, Liz, what would you suggest for trying to get rid of the parasite Blastocystis hominis?
Blastocystis hominis. Blastocystis is a parasite. In some people, it's considered to be a benign parasite. But there are a lot of other people who it makes really sick. And not being a physician, I don't treat parasites. My general recommendation would be to work with a physician and use regular drugs. Blastocystis hominis is notorious for being really hard to get rid of. And so I would at least start with drugs, and then I might follow up with some of the antiparasitic herbs like wormwood or black walnut, or even adding in things like oregano oil. But I would start by working with a physician and getting real medication for it, and maybe even a couple different rounds of that, and making sure that while you do that you're also like eating cultured and fermented foods, and maybe taking some probiotics so that you're kind of balancing what you're killing off with putting in some good stuff too.
Yes, and fermented food. I mean, this is a food that that is so beneficial for the gut, because we're adding some good friendly bacteria. Is there any specific fermented food, Liz, that you recommend?
One that you like is the most important thing,
yeah.
and that you'll eat. So a lot of people really like cultured dairy products, like old-fashioned made cheeses, some of the kind of cheeses that are more raw milk cheeses that haven't been ultra-pasteurized. They have a lot of good probiotic and prebiotic in them, or things like yogurt, if it's especially homemade yogurt or an organic yogurt that's made in an old-fashioned way, because a lot of yogurts are kind of not made in the kind of old-fashioned way. It's something as simple as drinking miso soup before a meal, or making some homemade pickles that you just leave on your counter and let ferment, or sauerkraut, or even wine or beer. If they haven't been, if they're, you get beer from a microbrewery and they're not preserving it, boy, what a great way to get probiotic bacteria. or a really good wine that doesn't have sulfites in it. Even sourdough bread is a good way to get some good probiotics. And, in other cultures, or in earlier times we didn't have refrigeration, and so people ate cultured foods because it went bad. And they discovered some of these new flavors. And, there's all kinds of things that we can eat that are good for us.
Mm. Liz, I asked you this question last time, but we have some new listeners on the call, and I'd like to ask you that question about hydrochloric acid. So can you explain the role of hydrochloric acid in our body and the dangers of not having enough hydrochloric acid in our body?
Sure. Remember earlier in the call I was talking about that the stomach is loaded with acid.
Yeah.
And that acid, if you spilled it on your hand, would burn you. And it doesn't burn your stomach because we've got a huge mucus coating in there. And so think about how your mucus is when you have a bad cold. So like that. And it protects the stomach itself from getting burned. And the purpose of that hydrochloric acid, as I started to say, was that it's our third or fourth line of defense against foodborne infections, because we might, take in bacteria or fungus or mold or a parasite or even viruses in our food. And so that hydrochloric acid starts breaking down and digesting protein. And, viruses and bacteria, and they are proteins, so it breaks them down so that we don't get food poisoning. The second thing that it does is it allows us to absorb into the first part of the small intestine. Is still pretty acidic, and that acid allows for the absorption of most of our minerals, including iron and calcium, zinc, potassium, magnesium, and others. And so, that hydrochloric acid protects us from food poisoning. It helps break down proteins, and then also helps with absorption of minerals. Very important. And there are a lot of people who just don't really have enough hydrochloric acid, and so they kind of keep getting everything that comes their way, food poisoning and gas and bloating and small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and other kind of conditions.
Wow, Liz, this is all the time we have today. God, we could be on this on the call for the afternoon, and still that wouldn't be enough. So, Liz, thank you so much for your time and sharing all that good information. Is there anything else you want to add before we end this call?
No, I just want to thank everybody for being on the call and caring enough about your health and the health of the people you love to keep kind of being curious. And I think that's mostly it. Again, you can find out more about me at innovativehealing.com or at muih.edu, which is where I teach and run our master's degree programs.
So thank you, Liz. You've been listening to Dr. Liz Lipski. Visit her website, innovativehealing.com. And thanks for joining us. I'm Nancy Desjardins from healthlady.com. Bye, Liz. Let's stay in touch.
Okay.